Hello and welcome to Restoration DIY, and whether you're new or returning to the channel, it's great to have you here and I hope you enjoy the video. In this episode, I'll be making a bowl from a cherry blank cast into white coloured epoxy resin. So without further ado, let's get into it. You join me as I'm gluing 2 waste blocks to the cherry blank. This is to save resin and to give me somewhere to place the weights to keep the blank submerged. Once done, I wax the inside of the casting mould, then I can move on to the next stage. For this project I mixed 3 batches of epoxy resin, and as usual I used my favoured brand, mixed at a 2:1 ratio. I don't like to use more than 3 or 4 batches at once, any more and the resin overheats and cracks whilst curing. The colour of choice was white. I haven't tried this before and I was keen to see how it would look. I used to add this in halfway through mixing, but now I just put it all in at the beginning. And so, with the colourant added, I thoroughly mixed each batch for the recommended amount of time. There's no reason to show all 3 being mixed, so with that done, I added them to the casting, and because it's all one colour, there was no need to pre-cook the resin. I was hoping it would have gone a bit further, it only just covered the first waste block, but I figured I could add more later if required. Next I placed 2 kilograms of weight to the top to hold the blank in place, using plastic spacers to stop things being epoxied together. Then it was ready for the pressure pot. I like to use the liner that came with the pressure pot. This will catch any leaked resin or overspill. So with this placed in the pot, I screwed the lid down, then I added my usual 50 to 55 psi. This was then placed in a warm room and left overnight to cure. It's now 24 hours later, the resin has cured and it can be taken out of the mould. Pre-waxing definitely helps to release it. A quick check showed there were no voids or cracks, so I removed the surplus waste block, marked the centre and drilled a hole on each end, ready to fix it to the lathe. Using the woodworm screw, I secured the blank to the lathe, using the tailstock to keep it centred and provide additional support. All done, I turned the speed up to around 1000 RPM and began turning. Using the EasyWood Tools full-size finisher, I set to getting the blank to round. This one was fairly well balanced, so it didn't take much, and soon I was able to get on with exposing the timber blank in the base. But as with my last project, something wasn't right. I was using a lot of pressure to get a decent cut. Then I remembered that the week before I'd blunted the cutter on a nail, so the joy of this tool is a quick loosen the tiny Allen bolt, and I could rotate the dull section round quarter of a turn, retighten it, and I was back to a sharp cutting edge. With the blank uncovered, I switched to a 3/8 bowl gouge. I decided early on that this bowl would have a pedestal. I felt this would retain a lot of the cherry and show off the figuring in the wood. Working on either side of the cutout, I gradually worked my way down to the required depth. There isn't a predetermined measurement for this, I just keep going till it looks right. Using the gouge to do this, I'm always aware that I risk getting a catch on the opposite side of the cut. So to minimise this, you can see that as I get close to the bottom, I roll the gouge over so it presents the cutting edge at a shallow angle to the opposite side. This can then be used to shear scrape back out of the cut. Next, I swapped the gouge for the skew chisel and blended the cutout into the lower section of the bowl, but the base still looked a bit thick and the cutout needed to be deeper, so I remedied that with a gouge. When I was happy the base section was more or less done, I turned the tool post 90 degrees so I could cut the mortise in the base. Before cutting the mortise, I had to remove the excess resin. Using the gouge, I shear scraped the outer edge to get a start, then I removed the rest with a push cut. A bit more shear scraping, and then I used a skew chisel to remove the tool marks. For the mortise, I defined the outer edge with a 1/4 inch parting tool, then I removed most of the inner material with a gouge, and then I cut the dovetail with a dovetail cutter. Then I made a slight design change. The base was just too wide, dominating the design. So using the gouge, I shear scraped the outer edge, reducing the overall diameter. For reference, what I'm pointing at is that I wanted to make it the same size as where the cherry and resin joined. It ended up being slightly less, but that was okay. Making that change made the base thicker, so I had to remove some of the excess from the underside and recut the mortise. The base was still a bit thick and the cutout needed to be a bit deeper, so to start off with I reprofiled it with a gouge, and if you look closely you can see when I switched the detail spindle gouge. This has a more swept back grind and I was able to define a sharper angle at the bottom of the cut. A final once over with a skew and it was done. Next, confident the woodworm screw was nice and secure, I removed the last bit in the mortise, added a few decorative rings, and then I sanded from 80 to 3000 grit. Sanding done, I added the finish. I cleaned down with denatured alcohol, then applied 2 coats of sanding sealer, each one denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Up next, Yorkshire grit, just a single coat, cleaned away until no more residue is picking up on the paper towel. Then the resin polishing, beginning with Polished 10, just a single coat, thoroughly cleaned away, ready for the next stage. Polished 5, another single application, polished off with clean paper towel to leave the resin with a deep shine. And last but not least, Hampshire Sheen Gloss Finishing Wax, 2 coats, buffed to seal and protect the surface. With the bowl turned around and fixed to the lathe using the 4-jaw chuck and the tailstock for additional security, I could begin hollowing out. To begin with, I used a bowl gouge. Now, something I haven't mentioned up to now is that the resin was not as hard as I'm used to. Normally I leave the blanks 3 to 4 days before turning them. However, this one is only just a day old, so the gouge had no problem cutting into the waste. And as ever, the ribbons of resin showered the camera, but surprisingly, in the next clip, you can still see through to the action. I cleaned the camera, and after a quick check, I continued cutting down into the base of the bowl. The first job was to completely remove the waste block and expose the top of the cherry blank, though I didn't want to go down much deeper than that. With the depth set, I could concentrate on thinning the sidewall down. The gouge soon gave way to the full-size carbide cutter, and with this, I was able to take a more controlled cut, peeling away streams of resin. It was at this point I noticed I was getting a fair bit of vibration in the workpiece, so I stopped to make sure the resin was still attached to the timber blank. All seemed well, so I continued, taking lighter cuts just in case. With most of the weight gone, I could remove the centre support. For this, I used the bowl gouge. With clear access into the bowl, I could use the gouge to remove the heavier tool marks and begin the final shaping of the side into the base. However, the large negative rate scraper seemed to be the best tool for this. I used it to blend and fare the cherry into the resin, creating a gentle curve matching the radius on the scraper. Using the skew, I tidied up the rim, sloping it back into the bowl with a slight curve on the inner edge. Then I gave it a final going over with a negative rate scraper, removing any last ridges and blemishes. And with the inside done, I sanded from 80 to 3000 grit. Sanding done, I applied the finish, the same as before. Cleaned down with denatured alcohol, then applied sanding sealer, denibbed with a non-abrasive scotch pad, then Yorkshire grit, thoroughly cleaned away, then the resin polish, Polar Shine 10, followed by Polar Shine 5, and finally Hampshire Sheen Gloss Finishing Wax. And that's it, another project finished, and I have to say I'm very happy with this one. The marbling in the resin looks great and contrasts well with the cherry, and I hope you like it as well. Now you may have noticed I left the side a bit thicker than usual. I might return to this bowl and add a lid. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, it will really help the channel out. A thumbs up will be great, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.